Hey, welcome everybody. My name is Vico Alvarez. I am the co-chair for the Southside branch of Chicago DSA. I put this in the chat, but the song that you just heard at the intro is by BBU, which includes one of our panelists, Jason Perez, who used to be a member of that group. I just wanted to make you blush a little bit before we got started. So yeah, welcome everybody. Thank you so much for joining us on a Friday evening. Y'all could be out drinking with your friends right now. And if you have a drink in your hand, I'm here for it. So thanks for being with us this evening. I'm gonna get this started by just laying out a few guidelines, which we refer to as feminist process. It just helps us get through discussion and make sure that we hear from as many people as possible. So first off, respect the discussion and the facilitators. Listen actively to your comrades when they speak. Listen to the facilitators, especially when they lay out guidelines for discussion. Share the air and encourage others. This is similar to step up, step back. Step up if you haven't said too much, and take a little step back if you feel like you've taken up a little too much space. Practice good faith. We cannot know the reasons that a person expresses an idea, so assume the best of your comrades, best intentions, even in disagreements. Consider your position. Think consciously of our social positions across gender, race, sexuality, so that we can be supportive of one another. Make I statements whenever possible. So rather than objective assertions, statements framed as I think, I feel, in my experience, should be used as much as possible. And try to avoid jargon. If somebody has an acronym or somebody has a word that they've used and you need a little bit of an explainer, feel free to throw it in the chat. We totally recognize that, when we speak fast, we're not always relaying every single detail. So feel free to ask in the chat if something is off, and I'm pretty sure somebody will be able to respond. Community guidelines for Zoom meetings. Turn on your video if you can. We are in a virtual world. It's very hard to really relate to one another. So if we can see your faces, that just helps a little bit more. Type stack, so that's the word stack, in the chat if you want to add something to the discussion. We're going to be going out into breakout groups later, so that'll apply once we listen to our panelists. Mute your microphone, please, whenever you're not speaking. The background noise can become super distracting. Avoid side conversations in the chat. So yes, definitely tell us if there's jargon, if there's something you don't know, but try to avoid any back and forth conversation with other comrades who are joining us today. And if you need to step away, feel free to turn off your video. Totally understand, people have things to do. But yeah, so those are just some very short guidelines. So why are we here today? So this is Get Rooted, how to organize neighborhoods and communities for a socialist Chicago. And we are talking about the South and West sides. So before I jump towards the socialist Chicago specifically, I just wanted to provide a little bit of my own sort of context as to why I feel the South and the West side are so important to organize in, and why I've chosen to organize with the Chicago Democratic Socialists. The South Side of Chicago covers approximately 50% of the city's entire land area. And of the residents living in this area, approximately 93% identify as Black. While the percentage of residents living below the poverty line in the entire city of Chicago is about 19%, some neighborhoods on Chicago's South Side have over 55% of its residents living in poverty. West Side neighborhoods, it's upwards of 40%. In the general public, it's kind of a no-brainer that the South and the West Side of Chicago are unfortunately notorious for a history of redlining, of depleting housing conditions, unemployment, and violence. But the South Side is also home to anti-Olympic protests of 1932, led by the Communist Party organizers in Chicago that demanded the release of imprisoned labor activists. The West Side was home to the Illinois Black Panther headquarters, which gave us Chairman Fred Hampton and the anti-racist, anti-class Rainbow Coalition. Humboldt Park on the West Side was the site of the Division Street riots, an explosion of pent-up racial tension between white residents who displaced Puerto Ricans further west, and the police notorious for their exploitation and abuses towards Boricua families. Southside was the home to Cleve Andrew Pulley, a Black Vietnam War veteran and steelworker who ran for mayor of Chicago in 1979 and then president of the United States in 1980, both times as a Socialist Workers' Party nominee. This is Southside history. Connotations of segregation, poverty, and violence run deep when we refer to Chicago's South and West Side, but as we move through today's conversation on contemporary organizing and getting rooted in our South and West Side neighborhoods, I hope that those connotations can shift in a direction of resistance and radical leftist organizing. And that no matter how much capitalist white supremacy has attempted to bury this history and even bury some of our current resistance efforts, we have to be the ones who keep it alive and let all of Chicago know that South and West Side residents have been rooted in radical organizing traditions. So what does that have to do with CDSA? Chicago DSA will produce a Towards a Socialist Chicago vision document outlining our priorities and strategies for the next 2 years. Organizing on Chicago's South and West Side is definitely a priority for us and one that we want to dive into with all of you. Developing the document has already begun with a period of discussion, debate, and reflection, such as today's conversation, and will be followed by a drafting process and discussion of that draft. The membership will vote on ratifying the document at the chapter convention in June. Our CDSA organizers will speak more to this document at the end of today's discussion. So let's get into it. So just a quick breakdown of the agenda. We're going to start off with a breakout into small groups of all of you. We want to allow you at least a couple minutes to just break the ice a little bit and get oriented to today's discussion. And then we're going to have our panelists speak for about an hour or so. We may have some extra time after that for Q&A, but we will let you know. And then after that, we're going to break out again into slightly longer small group discussions so that we can reflect on what some of our panelists have said. And then we'll wrap it up with quick report backs and a little bit more on Towards a Socialist Chicago. Hey, welcome back. Do we have everybody back now?
Yes, we do. So we can go ahead and get started here.
Awesome, let's do it. All right, so let's get our panel started. I'll do a quick rundown of our panelists and then we'll jump into our first speaker. So we have Frank Chapman, Director, Chicago Alliance Against Racist and Political Repression. And honestly, I'm sure he does so much more than that. Byron Sigcho Lopez, Alderman of the 25th Ward, and also with the Democratic Socialist Caucus of City Council, which just formed on May Day. We also had Crystal Guerra signed up to speak, but she had a family emergency, but ask about her. She's been very active with the South Side branch, especially building socialism on the Southeast side and active with the Stop General Iron campaign and also so much more. We are also joined by Ariana Salgado, an organizer. Oops, just a brief reminder to go on mute. I think I heard a dog toy maybe. Super cute though. Ariana Salgado, organizer with Organized Communities Against Deportations, OCAD, and we have Jason Perez as well, organizer with Chicago DSA and the Afro Socialists and Socialists of Color Caucus, locally and nationally. And finally, we have Diego Morales, CDSA Southside Branch co-chair along with me. Thank you all for joining us. For each panelist, we have a pre-prepared question, but of course, feel free to speak on what you think needs to be spoken on. So we're gonna get started with Frank. Frank, the question that we had for you was, could you speak to the tradition of left and radical organizing within Black communities in Chicago and to your own experience in these movements? Oops, I'm not sure we can hear you, Frank. I think you might be on mute.
Yeah, I can do that. I can.
There we go.
Definitely to my own experiences. Well, my experience with left radical organizing in Chicago goes back to the mid-'70s when I first came home after serving a sentence, well, after being in prison for about 15 years. And I had been wrongfully convicted in 1961 and had been given life in 50 years for murder and armed robbery. And it was a result of the movement, particularly the movement involving the campaign to free Angela Davis and all political prisoners, that got me out. And that movement was successful in getting Angela Davis out, and I think it was 71. And it was also successful in getting me out in 1976. And that's when I first came to Chicago after getting out. And I remember when I came here, I met a number of people who were involved in Angela's campaign who also helped me out. And some of them had come out of the revolutionary and socialist traditions of this city. Like, for example, Sylvia Woods, who was a Black woman union organizer and also a member of the Communist Party. And she's the star of this movie, one of the stars of this movie called Union Maids, you know. She was involved in some organizing back in the 30s. I had the pleasure of meeting her. When I met her, she had been the chairperson of the Committee to Free Angela Davis and all political prisoners. So that was really an honor. Also, there was Fred Hampton's brother, Bill Hampton, who I met. And in fact, we went back to St. Louis together to show a film about Fred Hampton. And we did some organizing to support the December 5th committee. And then I met also Beatrice Lumpkin, who's still around. I think she's 103 years old now. You know, she's been involved with the Communist Party for many years. And I also knew her husband, Frank Lumpkin, who was a steel worker with Wisconsin Steel. So I was, and then I left out Ronell Musson, who was involved in the anti-apartheid movement here, who also introduced me to Rudy Lozano over on the southwest side in Little Village. So that was a very interesting experience, just meeting these people and having the opportunity to organize with them. But the best experience I had of all, except what's going on right now, was I came here in the early 80s and going into 1981 and 1983 to help organize around the campaign to get Harold Washington elected to mayor. And it was during that period that I met Rudy Lozano and a number of the people over there in Little Village, Emma Lozano, just a whole group of radicals who were very much involved in organizing in the community. And they taught me a lot about organizing in Chicago. They introduced me to the concept of organizing door by door and block by block, neighborhood by neighborhood, district by district. And that's exactly how they did it, you know. And they were not just involved in political campaigns, they won political campaigns, you know. So they knew what they were doing, and I learned a great deal from them, you know. In fact, a lot of what we're doing now in the struggle to get community control of the police in this city, I learned from these people, you know. So that was kind of like my introduction to what's going on in Chicago here on the left. However, I didn't stay here. I moved to New York, and a lot of my organizing life, over 30 years of it, was done in that city. But I was always coming back to Chicago, you know. What I like about Chicago as compared to New York is it is a great working class city. You know? New York is, you know, very commercial and has a very strong petty bourgeois element who thinks they're working class, you know. But and they're very arrogant too, you know. So but anyway, I'm not gonna dump on New York because I defended it when I was living there. But I really had a lot of respect for Chicago and the organizers here, because to me they were the epitome of what a grassroots organizer is all about. You know, people like Sylvia Woods. I mean, you know, Sylvia single-handedly collected like about 2,000 signatures for Angela Davis. And when I went out in the community with her to organize, I saw how she done it. You know, she had no fear of people at all. She talked to people. She talked to them about what was going on in their lives, you know, but she also talked to them about socialism. She also talked to them about we could have a better society than this, that we can do better than this as a class. And she also talked to Black people about Black liberation. And she had been a Garveyite before she came into the communist movement. So she had also had some deep roots in the Black community in terms of Black nationalism and so on. But I learned a great deal from these people. I must be getting past my 8 minutes now. I learned a great deal from these people, and I try to apply those things today, you know, in you know, doing the organizing that we're currently doing in the community. I live on the south side, by the way. I'm in Woodlawn. Is that my 8 minutes?
Is it, Sveta? Okay. I have so many questions, but I will wait until all of our panelists go. Thank you, Frank. So we're gonna move on to Byron. I think we have Byron now.
Yes.
Awesome. So Byron, the question that we had for you, and again, if you want to speak to other things, totally cool. What's the relationship between ward, neighborhood, and block level organizing and a strategy for a socialist city, in your opinion anyway?
Thank you. I think, and I think Frank alluded to this, and thank you for the invitation. The importance of grassroots organizing, the deep canvassing that Frank was talking about, the door to door, the block by block, neighborhood by neighborhood, city by city, right? When we built the socialist movement, it has to do with relationships that we built in the communities that we live in, that we work in, that we want to be part of. So in terms of the socialist movement, I do think that is important and very, very critical that we understand that there are many forces that are playing right now at this very moment to maintain the status quo. There are Democrats and Republicans alike who will do whatever it takes to retain power, to continue with the corruption and continue with the disenfranchising, the police brutality, the pay to play, the markets that commodified housing, that exclude the most vulnerable, the violence, and so forth. The way for us to make sure that we provide a alternative and a clear answer to these problems have to do with the relationship that we built in the communities that we serve. The door-to-door is not a transactional, and I want to be very clear, and I'm very candid and honest here. And I've seen many of you have been heard and other attempts of this kind of organizing. You know, Alinsky was one of the models, that was very popular. Out of that, I don't know, many of you remember the United Neighborhood Organization, where my predecessor was part of. We also know that they built a whole charter privatizing scheme that took away money from our public schools to give it to corporations, to give it to even political campaigns, including Rahm Emanuel, where the former CEO, Juan Rangel, served not only as the CEO of the charter school network, but also as campaign manager for Rahm Emanuel, just to show the connections. And these are really, really entrenched politicians with a sense of organizing. Now, the kind of organizing that they provided, the Alinsky style, the ones that cut a deal or make these incremental gains, and then further delays a structural change, have significant repercussions for our community. I think that Frank mentions the good legacy, the great legacy that we have of organizers like Rudy Lozano, an organizer who was killed under very suspicious conditions, I should say the least. But definitely that the attempt was to intimidate, to create fear and confusion. Again, and some of these same players, Daley, which was the state's attorney, at the time. And I think that some of the interests at play that prey into communities like the Latinx community, like the Black community, to intimidate, to provide fear, but also pseudo leaders like Juan Rangel and the many other Alinsky-style organizers that came with false promises of helping addressing those structural change. But all they did was to provide shelter for politicians and a megaphone for politicians like Rahm Emanuel, politicians like Professor Solis, Burke, and you name it. They built an entire infrastructure to deceive, to confuse people, and don't make no mistake, they're going to do that again and again. So I do think it's very important that we understand what is at stake right now. In terms of organizing, if we're not investing time in the communities that we need to serve, if we're not building relationships, if we're not in schools talking to parents, if we're not door-to-door talking about empowering communities for public safety, if we're not talking on the ground to the people who are affected by police brutality, we're not going to succeed. There are Democrats right now in our spaces. Like many of you remember Reclaim Chicago and some of these groups that came to co-opt the spaces for the Democratic Party and confuse people. And many of them call themselves socialists, but tell you far from it. These are Alinsky-style techniques, false organizing, that all it does is to hype up people into believing into a mission, into believing a vision, but there's really select very few people that are cutting deals and speaking on behalf of people, and that is one thing that we have been against. But what we're building is socialism. We have we've seen for what happened across the world right now, what's happening. All this is interconnected. I know Frank and leaders for the Black Panther movement talk about this, important of the international proletarian revolution, the importance of creating these connections between what's happening in Palestine, in Colombia, what's happening in Bolivia, what's happening in the different parts of the world, and how it relates to what's happening here, and how policies coming from here, from Chicago, that the Chicago boys and so far, who came and dropped policies, Milton Friedman. Some of these players are from Chicago. And then, of course, the Democratic Party that attempts to sell these failed models across the world, but also here in the city of Chicago. We have to make sure that when we talk about organizing, we talk about the real issues impacting people, the police brutality cases, the key campaigns too, to defund the police, to make sure that these services go and to help our communities. That's something that our communities understand and they need to be part of. But again, be careful. And I think it was very clear. And I know that as a Thursday, we celebrated the birthday of Malcolm X. Be careful not only with the wolf, because with the wolves, and that's oftentimes referred to the Republican Party, who we know who they are. And I think that they are, of course, an enemy. But also let's be careful with the foxes, the Democrats, who with a smile, like the fox comes, almost smiling, coming close, friendly, but when they're at a striking distance, they will bite us. And that's what some of these operatives and hacks do. They come to our spaces to distract from issues and take us away from the real issues. And that happened to us here in the 25th Ward, when we have operatives trying to co-opt our spaces, trying to deceive, to cut deals, and to elect pseudo leaders to office or organizers on the ground. This is important to understand. I know that history doesn't repeat itself. They're going to come back again, and they're going to come back for the socialists. Rosa Luxemburg said it well. It is going to be either socialism or barbarism. And right now we still are in a state of barbarism. By block, community per community, what we done here in the 25th Ward is not only, I was the previous director of Pilsen Alliance, with a grassroots organization, an organization with deep ties with the community that has elders. I want to recognize leaders like Magda Ramirez Castañeda, the former president who unfortunately passed away a few years ago. We had leaders, Chicanas of 18th Street, Laura Paz, and many others who came and gave us the pathway and learning from them about what happened in the past so we don't commit these same mistakes for the future. It is so important for all the young people who are listening today that it's important to understand and know who we're working with. Never make assumptions about people who talk a good talk. We got to look for the actions and what they have been before they organize. And that's very critical so that we don't get deceived. The door-to-door, the relationship that we build and the vision that we build has to be towards socialism, has to be towards making sure that we put people over profit, and that we talk about the issues on the ground to make sure that's a platform for the people. And I think it's very critical that when we go door to door, and I was really inspired and thankful for the Democratic Socialist America, it was because of DSA. It was because of the organization in Pilsen, the deep organizing, that we're able to build connections in other neighborhoods. We went to Abla homes, we went to Barbara Jean Wright, the strong enclaves of the Black community. Now we have very strong relationships with them because we understand that what happens to them is it pertains and affects us. There's always an attempt to divide and conquer, to keep communities separate, to say, no, you just worry about your community. That's what they keep us segregated. That's how they keep us divided. The goal is, of course, to build, but build deep in our communities, to make sure that we go door to door, to protect our neighborhoods, to make sure that we connect what's happening in our neighborhood citywide. What's happening in each neighborhood affects all of us. That's what I think is very important. It's very interesting, and I will leave you with this. And most recently, and I'm not going to say the caucus was, but there was a discussion about sanctioning alders that are joining protests and joining movements. In other words, that is an interesting attempt to try to silence elected officials who have a responsibility to be leaders in the community, to represent the best interests of the community. The other narrative that you see from Democrats and Republicans is that we should not be paying attention to politics, that because it's in our neighborhood, we got to either do grassroots or organizing and separately electoral politics. We got to do both. We got to do grassroots organizing, and we got to connect it to the political arena. It is both politics and electoral organizing as well as grassroots organizing, and making sure that we work hand in hand. That's what we built, a strong 25th Ward independent political organization. That is a very important model to make sure that we hold elected officials accountable. The grassroots organizing or community groups like Pilsen Alliance, that, by the way, was one of the first groups that endorsed CPAC, several years ago. But I think, again, when we go to campaigns door to door, let's not be surprised. When we do the work, that's what we have done. When we were one of the founders of lifting the ban on rent control, we saw 70% plus of the people voting in favor of lifting the ban on rent control. That's when we do deep organizing and connect citywide. This is the responsibility now to make sure that in every corner in the city of Chicago, they hear about socialism. They hear about what the democratic socialists are about. But let's not forget that we have to make sure that we go to 77 neighborhoods in the city of Chicago that we have to cover. We're getting there. But let's not follow Lori Lightfoot's model to lift bridges and focusing in downtown and certain communities. We have a responsibility to go everywhere, to build socialism, to build a movement, and to be honorable with our movement. And that's only going to happen when we connect the dots. We're building solidarity. We build door by door, but always with a larger vision. I see it. I see DSA as a larger umbrella. I see a lot of IPOs and community groups that are on the ground. We need to connect the dots. And we not only have to do it here in the neighborhood, in the city, nationally, but internationally. The international proletarian revolution is a very real thing. And what happened in Palestine is a great reminder that why we have to be in solidarity to make sure that we condemn injustices wherever they are, injustices anywhere and injustices everywhere. And when we act in solidarity and when people see us out there, no matter, and that's the thing, that's what the Democrats and Republicans hate us the most, because when there's injustices somewhere, we are there. We're there in support, we're there in solidarity. So let us be careful not to spend too much time with internal politics, with internal issues. That's what the Democrats and Republicans want us to do. Let's make sure that we build, we get out there, we come out with a platform, a plan to connect with the neighborhoods, to connect with our communities. Let's build platforms with the independent political organizations or DSA, or however we see fit, so that we can build community to build the city that is possible. Let us not follow for what they want to show us as possible. Neoliberalism, capitalism has failed, and we know the answer is socialism.
Thank you, Byron. People are clap, 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 snap, snaps, fire emoji, party react. All right, thank you, Byron. I'm gonna move into our next speaker, Ariana, who again is with Organized Communities Against Deportations, has been an organizer for years at stopping deportations, amongst other immigrant rights issues. The question that we had for you, I'm gonna change it a little bit from what I emailed you, dude. So the question is, how can we support individuals who are in a specific struggle? So, for example, deportations or otherwise, while also engaging them in a broader struggle to empower communities broadly. And I mean, I think in this case, we're talking specifically socialism. How do we engage them, or vice versa? How does the movement for socialism engage folks who are involved in specific struggles, such as fighting deportations? Your thoughts?
Thank you so much for having me again. I guess I'll just, it's still similar to what I was emailed, so hopefully I don't deviate too much from my notes. Yeah, so I work with organized communities against deportations since we started back in 2012 and 2013. And the main goal of the organization was essentially to support individuals who found themselves in removal proceedings and who were interested in fighting their deportation case or their removal case. And when we started, we really wanted to prioritize individuals who found themselves at the intersection of the criminal system and the immigration system, right? So folks who had had some sort of interaction with the police, right? And then because of that ended up at the hands of ICE or Immigration and Customs Enforcement. And with this, our goal was essentially to change the narrative and change the story that generally was being told about immigration and immigrants, right? It's generally very much like, oh, these are good immigrants, they're good for the economy. We need to like give them papers so they can continue to work, you know, and things like that. And this is a lot of the narrative that, you know, you heard like back in like with the big marches in 2006 and those years, and that you kind of still hear now, right? Like the whole immigration reform, and it's very much based on like what what immigrants can do for the country in terms of the economy, right? Like they have, like just let them in so they can like continue to work in these really shitty jobs that treat them terribly, right? So our goal was really to change and shift that, right? To make sure that folks were thinking not only of like, what does it mean to have legal status in the country, but does legal status actually mean like liberation for the immigrant community, right? And taking a lot of our cues and like lessons from folks who were already like in the labor movement, right? In the Black liberation movement, who were signaling, right? Like it doesn't, like to a certain degree, it doesn't really matter whether you're a citizen or a resident, right? Yes, it matters for purposes of like you being taken by ICE. And at the same time, that doesn't mean that our issues as like poor working class people, people of color are gonna go away just because we have this status, right? And so it was really to bring attention and to shift us from just focusing on legalization and on immigration reform, right? Because when we're talking, or when the larger movement as a whole talks about immigration reform, they're really just talking about like giving people papers. And at the same time, a lot of the bills that have been introduced are heavy on like the enforcement, you know, that still goes to like Customs and Border Patrol and ICE and other DHS, Department of Homeland Security agencies, right? And so it is very, very reformist. And in my opinion, it doesn't actually get to like what really needs to be changed or reformed in the immigration law, which essentially, in my opinion, needs to be like the laws that passed, particularly under the Clinton administration in 1996, right? That essentially marry the immigration system and the criminal system, and that allow, right, for the expansion of ICE as we know it today. Even though ICE is fairly recent, right? It's these laws that really allow it to function in the way that they function, and allow for like prison expansion, for ICE detention expansion and things like that, right? And so those laws don't really address that, right? Once again, these immigration reform proposals don't really address that. They essentially just kind of focus a lot on like, you know, the legalization of the really few amount of people that would qualify anyway, right? And the few people that are usually covered here are like the good immigrants, right? The immigrants that like never get in trouble, like your 4.0 like GPA students, right? And things like that. And so once again, with our cases, we really wanted to make sure to challenge those narratives, right? To say, you know, even if somebody had, you know, was sent to prison, even if somebody just like got a ticket, even if somebody is not like a good worker, right? Which is something that a lot of immigrant rights like always say, like, oh, look, this is an exceptional person that produces so much for this country, blah, blah, blah. Like give them papers. And what we're saying with our cases is like, you don't have to be exceptional. You don't have to be perfect to be able to, you know, move around and live, you know, where home is and what home means to you, right? And so a lot of our cases definitely challenge that. So yeah, so that's a big way in which you know, we decided to prioritize and take on you know, some of our cases. The other thing that we wanted to make sure to do with the work and with our cases is making sure that we are highlighting cases that once again highlight a lot of these intersections that our undocumented immigrant community faces, right? So once again, cases where folks, you know, are at the intersection of different systems that essentially fuck us over, right? Some of our very first cases were cases of individuals who lived outside of Cook County and outside of the city of Chicago. And for folks that are familiar, like with the DuPage County, Kane County, all of those like outer counties, right? Those are the counties that generally, not that Cook County doesn't, right, but that kind of more fiercely collaborate with immigration, right, and that racially profile people. So with a lot of our initial cases, you know, we were trying to once again make the connection for people, right? That these two institutions work together, not only to make sure that we're like constantly targeted, you know, and if you're not undocumented, just targeted by the police or sent over by ICE, right? And so making those connections. Another case that I wanted to mention that also allowed us to, you know, bring in ally organizations and allied individuals is the case of Muhammad Ahmad a few years ago. And we came across Muhammad's case because he had been in detention for over a year and a half when we, you know, came across him. He is Palestinian. And he had already been ordered removed. He also had an FBI memo out against him, accusing him of ISIS ties, right? And immigration was not deporting him because, you know, he's stateless because he's Palestinian. Israel wouldn't take him, right? And then they wouldn't release him because of the FBI memo, right? And so that was another case that allowed us to draw like in all of these intersections and all of these communities that are, you know, that usually people don't think about when they think about immigration, right? And so how are we drawing those connections and how are we using these cases to bring people in that you wouldn't necessarily, or that aren't really necessarily part of the larger, you know, like immigrant rights or like the main narrative. It's also cases like Muhammad's that allow us to really bring to light that it's not just ICE or Immigration and Customs Enforcement, but it's actually the Department of Homeland Security, right? That was developed in 2003. And what are all of these like little institutions that exist under it, ICE being one of them, the Customs and Border Patrol, right, HSI, all of these agencies within it that need to go, right? That their main focus is racially profiling and criminalizing, you know, our Black and Brown communities. And the other case, and I'll stop there, is the case of Wilmer Castellanos. A few years ago, his home was raided after some like Freedom of Information filing and all of these things with the city and CPD. We were able to figure out that he had been placed in the gang database, right? And so the fight at that point became not only to ensure that we you know, stopped Wilmer's removal, and at the same time to make sure that we did something about the gang database, right, that we knew was feeding people into the immigration system, right? And so making sure that we're making those, once again, connections, and making those intersections very obvious, not only for our undocumented community, right, which is always a challenge, and also, right, to our allies and who's going to be supporting us in movement and then pushing for, you know, for people to be able to stay in the country. And I'll stop at that.
Thank you, Ariana. That was great. And we are good on time, so don't worry too much about it. So let's go on to our next speaker, Jason BBU Perez. So Jason, the question that we had for you is if you could just speak more about AfroSoc, about its history, what strategies it has to put forward for movement building locally or nationally, and just its general role of an independent organization for people of color, especially as we work towards building a multiracial working class movement.
Okay. Oh, that's all. Okay, cool. And I don't have to worry about time, so I can just
figure it out.
Yeah. Okay. What's up, everyone? Yeah, AfroSoc. We started in 2017 out of the 2017 National Convention, like the one coming up. Mainly from folks from New York. It was mostly Black folks, but other folks of color too, who were just I think they came into the project of DSA like wanting to make deeply believing in multiracial organizing, and there was a lot of folks who came from either like Black majority or Black only organizations, or like folks of color or majority organizations, but they also wanted something that was more explicitly radical and also like focused on multiracial organizing like citywide, and so that's why they joined up DSA, and then just like over over the year and a half of just like trying to get through stuff, and some of them were like co-chairs of like their various branches in New York. They just like were like, yo, we actually do need a caucus, and actually the person who really helped found it, Bianca Cunningham, at first she was like against like even having like an identity-based caucus, and she eventually moved to like, no, this does need to happen. And I think it was partly just like chauvinism by comrades, and then also just many times it wasn't necessarily so much like the actual campaign that was being focused on, right? But it was like how you organize for the campaign, the communities that you actually organized, that you door knocked in, and also even just like your talking points in terms of like what you're actually trying to move folks around on various issues, and when you provide that pushback, try to show that pushback, because a lot of times DSA spaces are white majority. Folks of color weren't listened to, and at times it would turn into like this kind of thing of even though usually a lot of DSA folks are like all kind of like PMC-ish or PMC adjacent or whatever, right? But it turned into like you're being identitarian, you're being this neoliberal, you're being this like petty bourgeoisie, whatever it is, right? Meanwhile, them with their PhDs or whatever other things were like not that, and they were like speaking the true like universalist working class gospel. So after all that fuck shit, folks are just like, yo, we need to do like, we need to make something like AfroSoc. And so they started organizing folks. They like made out a resolution. They were like, had other like folks, like other chapters and other folks of color, and even other white folks like sign on to the resolution. Some folks like were getting their feelings about it. Adolph Reed like even went on a podcast being like, this is going to like lead to the downfall of DSA and they should not support this. And also too, because like one of the things was like, having DSA support reparations, supporting at the time like Divest Invest and like BYP's like Fund Black Futures campaign and program. And so, but like when it came onto the convention floor, it was, like a lot of things, like, I think especially with like the more like the class reductionist contingent, and like the public one, it's more of just like, a lot of bark, but like no bite, and certainly not enough like ability to move the membership or to move the membership around an agenda or, and so, AfroSoc was formed as a caucus. We started building out different caucuses, all in different cities, and it was fairly uneven, and it was more of a social club. It was less around like, at first it was less around like, just like having like any sort of like general organizing agenda, things like that. And as it grew out, more folks have come in, and then like, and also too, just to make it clear, like we're an official caucus of DSA, and now we have chapters in DC, New York, Chicago, Seattle, Atlanta, New Orleans, Dallas, Austin, and many more. But I'm from Santa Cruz, of course, the Bay, LA, and so I think I know within DSA, like there's like folks who like feel like somehow AfroSoc is this thing that's like gonna like fractionalize the membership, that it's like undermining the political will of the membership or the type of organizing that we need to do, and like true multiracial organizing. I would argue in my experience, just in terms of building out chapters in other places, and of course here with folks here, is that most of the time people join AfroSoc and then they start joining other DSA committees, and then they become part of DSA life, and all the back and forth and all the dramas that happens with it, but also all the like good things and like all the campaigns that we win and all the door knocking that we do. And so, I mean, I view it as a thing that actually brings folks into DSA and to enjoy DSA. I know for myself, it was important for me to trust DSA like on that level, because when I first went to a DSA meeting, it was majority white folks, right? And it was the first time ever in like my organizing life. I've been organizing for 20 years in Chicago, born and raised, like been in all types of organizing spaces, like professionally and also like, on a volunteer level and as a member. And, I've never been in like a super majority white space. It's really hard. I feel like it's really hard to do that in Chicago, especially like when you're doing like explicitly leftist organizing. And that was the case. And even for me, who I feel like, fairly experienced, and I grew up on the North Side and stuff, like it was still like fairly intimidating to me. And just threw me off. And I think, that happens to a lot of folks. And I think having a space where it's still like majority folks of color, you walk in, you're able to start seeing like your issues reflected, and even issues like Green New Deal, Medicare for All, the ones that folks claim are like more universalist issues, versus like defund or immigration, which are somehow like put as like particular issues or whatever. They're worked through in a way, and they're thought through in a way, and they're fought for and campaigned in a way that actually speaks to folks of color in particular, and I think enables better organizing in communities of color, especially working class communities. I guess moving forward, where we're at now, I think it's important just to realize like AfroSoc is not the cure-all be-all of how to turn DSA into like a multiracial organization. It should never be. It was never meant to be that. But at least what we are trying to do is we're trying to like fight for resolutions. We're trying to fight for priorities that then ensures that we can do the kind of organizing that resonates with folks of color in Chicago, and then of course nationally too. So I think how the leadership in this chapter at least showed up for defund, and made sure we had a defund committee, made sure it was out doing protests with folks, making sure it was bringing folks in, and then also supporting the work of AfroSoc. I think that's really important. Like some chapters in DSA did that, other chapters didn't, right? Like other chapters were like, we're focused on like our narrow thing, and we're not going to respond to this moment of defund. We're not going to like actually like change our orientation a little bit and see what the conditions and respond to those conditions in a good faith way. But there's obviously more that we need to do on that. That's why I'm supporting the multiracial organizing committee like nationally, so that we can have that kind of support. Also too, we just need more Black and Latinx organizers on staff. Like the DSA staff is like really, really white, or like has a lot of white passing people, which just isn't great. Well, it just isn't great on like so many levels, right? But it's just like, it just creates organizing problems. Like even my labor organizing days, like it was just like, you just didn't send like all white staff to bargaining units in areas that you knew were going to be majority Black or majority Latinx. Like you just didn't do those things, And I know some people are like, oh, this is identitarian, this is that. I mean, if that's where you're at, that's where you're at. Like I care about organizing, I care about getting results, and I care about winning campaigns. And I care about winning campaigns, because sometimes, in DSA we do things like, well, we won that campaign. It's like, cool, we won that campaign, which is like, we need to win those campaigns, right? But I think we don't want to turn into like almost kind of like short-sighted, like some of the sides of like short-sighted labor, short-sighted like nonprofit type of stuff, where you win the campaign, but then you never really develop membership. You never brought folks in the areas that you're organizing, and you might have even brought them into the campaign a little bit, but then you never actually brought them into the organization. and you have to like have reflections for why that is, and like if they see themselves in the organization or not. And so I think moving forward, you know, we still need to build out AfroSoc, right? But we still need to make sure that we're doing like work around organizing campaigns that I think actually like bring Black folks in, Indigenous folks, and people of color. So yeah, that's all I got. Thanks.
Thank you, Jason. And let's move in.
Oh, I'm sorry. No.
Oh, what's up?
Oh no, you know what? I just one more thing. Yeah. So I think, a lot of times like we want to, there's like, sometimes these debates around like structure-based organizing or like self-selecting or like, and like movement organizing or like self-selecting organizing, right? And then like structure-based base building organizing to organize, that's supposed to be the ultimate thing. And then like, activist organizing, which is like, like let's say what we saw with the uprising, sometimes like some aspects of immigration work, sometimes it's seen as like this like small marginal fractional thing. And, I think for DSA, like we have to, I think we have to be honest with ourselves that we need to do both approaches, right? We need to do an organizing that organizes the organizers, but then also a type of organizing that organizes the unorganized. And I think not allowing ourselves to fall into like this either or thing and like trying to like say that it's going to be authentic or not authentic. And I see that especially sometimes happening with like how we do or how we think about our labor organizing work. And then also too that like, our labor organizing work becomes this thing of like, I'm trying to authenticate myself as like the real like organizer person, whatever. But if you're doing rank and file and like folks are not being brought into like the organization in a meaningful way, and not in a way of like where you're browbeating them, but they're like, oh, they want to join it. Like when I talk to homies about AfroSoc and like they see what they do and then they hit me up about it and they want to join it. Like if it's not resonating at that level, then there's something wrong with how we're approaching, like our labor strategy. There's something wrong with how we're approaching our electoral strategy or our community organizing strategy. And that stuff, there's no simple answers to it, but it's stuff that we have to reflect on and think through and not just think that like, because sometimes we want to say it's all local. We just got to make it local, or we got to make it statewide, or we got to make it national, or we got to make it structure based, or we got to make it more activist based. And it's, you can do all those different types of organizing really shitty. A lot of nonprofits do it really shitty. A lot of labor organizing things do it really shitty, or you can do it really well that actually like brings folks of color in and like and builds out the working class. So yeah.
Extra minute well spent. Thanks, Jason. All right, so our last speaker is going to be Diego Morales, co-chair of CDSA's Southside branch. And the question that we had for you is, can you speak to the organizing work of Chicago DSA and what the Southside branch is doing now? What highlights and obstacles have been helping to grow our base in these communities? And I think we're gonna have a little bit of extra time, correct me if I'm wrong, Sveta, for questions. I definitely have some questions in my back pocket, but if folks wanna throw any in the chat, I'd love to see them and maybe I can figure out how to work them in. But go ahead, Diego.
Hey, everybody. So I'm a bit of a dork and I get nervous at these things. So I kind of prepared my remarks, but I'm going to try to riff off of them to the best of the ability to fit the sort of organic vibe that we got going. But I think in understanding DSA's role in organizing on the South Side, for example, it's first important to recognize that what other people have wonderfully laid out is that Chicago has one of the richest histories of class struggle in the United States. Whether through the workplace, whether through community-based organizations, or whether through the state or the government in this case. And it's just important to mention that we all really are standing on the shoulders of giants before us who've gone back more than 100 years. For example, like Vigo had mentioned the Communist Party in the 30s, where socialists would organize in communities and among the unemployed, what Marx would refer to as the reserve army of labor, for instance, and that would lead to mass defense demonstrations against, for example, evictions that in some cases were so effective that the police would respond and in some cases fire upon the crowds because they were so powerful. If you want to learn, there's a case of Diana Gross in 1930, a 17-year-old Black woman who lived in what is now Washington Park, kind of gives you a taste of that history and like curious echoes of what's going on now. In the same era, in which the racist policy of redlining really took hold, the practice of intentionally withholding housing, home ownership, bank loans, other avenues of wealth from particularly Black communities and immigrant communities, right? Redlining itself is very much a product of economists from the University of Chicago, and decades later, you had other Chicago communities get together and organize against these racist practices, fought to establish reforms like the Fair Housing Act, the Community Reinvestment Act, others, and so much of this history really is in the interest of the defense of our communities, of fighting to keep them together, to keep them stable, and to keep them strong. And this is kind of in part really just to underpin the fact that there are many organizations and communities with history that are already fighting the good fight against these various oppressions, right? And so much of what CDSA has done, and much of what it is to do, but not all of what it has to do, but much of what it is to do, is to support these historical struggles that have, these sort of current day manifestations, and just to go through them, Alderman Brian Socialist had mentioned, probably our biggest campaign in the city has been to lift the ban on rent control, joining a multiracial coalition, the Coalition to Lift the Ban across the city and in fact the state, to fight back against gentrification, to fight back against the capitalist system of privatized for-profit housing, fighting for a reform, yes, a reform, but a reform that challenges the logic of accumulation of profits over people, to help stabilize our communities, because our communities are a powerful political unit. And more importantly, how we did this. Much of this work is done by talking to our neighbors, by knocking on doors, through things like the referendum campaigns, where the question of rent control was posed to communities through the election ballot, right? We weren't in the back doors making deals. We weren't, that shady consultants and lobbyists. We did it from the ground up. We did it with people power, and that's how we have to do in all of the different spaces that we're in. And it has also meant that we've expanded our work to help form, for example, the Chicago Tenants Movement. That's an organization birthed out of the immense need from the pandemic in order for tenants to organize and fight back against the developers, against the landlords, again, building by building from the ground up. This has also meant supporting IPOs, which has been mentioned before, but it stands for Independent Political Organization, which are ward-based organizations, as well as community-based organizations on all kinds of issues. For example, many of our comrades helped train and organize local brigades of neighbors and immigrant communities, especially, who would patrol the streets in the ready defense against any ICE activity, especially during the Trump administration when a lot of that ramped up. But, best believe we're going to see some of that under the Biden administration as well. So it's also meant responding to the enormous need from the pandemic, in which so many of us and our neighbors were abandoned by the capitalist system that kept pushing for the continued production of goods and services, while tens and thousands of us were dying from this virus. And our government, being entirely captured by the capitalist class through neoliberalism, refused to do what other sensible governments have done, which is to pay us to stay home so that we can minimize the virus from spreading. And instead, I know for myself, I live a block away from the Pilsen food pantry here in Pilsen, and for months, my window faces them. And for months and months, I would wake up every day, and the first thing I would see would be lines stretching down the block of families, showing up because they just had to get food for their family to eat. It's just the need was just so dire. That's why, for example, Chicago DSA, especially the Southside branch, responded by forming our mutual aid and solidarity committees. Shout out Vico, especially for spearheading a lot of that effort, that would go out to meet the direct needs of our most vulnerable neighbors, right? And again, the flashpoint was really, the pandemic, I should say, was a flashpoint for the struggle in the city, because there's still an ongoing struggle, for example, to keep open the Trinity Hospital network, which is located in Bronzeville, as well as a lot of other clinics around the South Side. Again, they're trying to close hospitals in the middle of a pandemic, completely unconscionable behavior. And that's why we have members, for example, who work in these hospitals and help organize workers to fight back against these closings, to support the community and the patients that they serve. And I don't think you can talk about struggle on the South Side without talking about the devastating environmental racism that is waged on our South Side communities. It's been incredible to see the work of our comrades and neighbors in the Southeast Side in fighting back against General Iron, fighting back against these metal shredders, to stand in solidarity with their efforts. The South Side has always been a dumping ground for capitalist industry, right? And not only is it unacceptable to sacrifice our neighbors' bodies for the profits of these polluters, but the industries of these polluters themselves are unsustainable if we're going to keep a planet that's habitable in the face of climate change, So the solidarity that we share is also with our planet, with our home, our most fundamental community. And these enemies, these polluters, are living their last breaths in a history of our species in which they no longer belong in. So very proud to be, standing side by side along that work. Recently, we have launched our stimulus campaign for the homeless, which is in partnership with the Chicago Union of the Homeless, where we service homeless individuals and making sure they get their stimulus checks to connect them with the organization. And again, that organization, the Union of the Homeless itself, has a rich history of fighting and winning for the working class. They won hundreds of thousands of units for homeless people, for example, in the late 80s and early 90s. And now there's a new manifestation of it. And again, going back, this is a very proud echo, I think, of the socialist giants whose shoulders we stand on, who helped organize the unemployed 100 years ago, for example. And then, of course, there's the struggle against the police, against the carceral state. Last summer, we saw an international almost uprising against the police state, especially here in the United States, especially here in Chicago, right? And I'm proud of comrades in Chicago DSA, especially, for example, shout out Red Rabbits. I know Mal, I think, is on the call, who really showed up and made sure that we could help coordinate and be a part of these mass demonstrations, be a part of this mass, do unrest. And making sure that the ruling class, the systems that govern us, heard us and were listening to us when we said we need to defund the police, we need abolition. The reason why we don't have so many of the resources that we need, the reason why we don't live in comfortable environments like in so many other places, because the state chooses to spend all of that money on militant carceral systems like the police. You expand that nationally and internationally. It's the same with the military budget. So this is anti-colonial struggle as well that we are engaging in. That's just to really underpin that there's a historical moment that we're living in. And I'm really glad that we are continuing to grapple with that. And so if it sounds like there's a lot going on, it's because there is, right? The oppressions, the injustices, the harms that the South Side faces are all encompassing in every facet of daily life in this downward spiraling empire. And that's why it's so important in this moment to not be afraid to tell the truth, the full truth, to own the gravity of what is to be done. That's all of our problems share a source, capitalism, and that it must be challenged and defeated if we are to survive. And that challenge has a name, and that challenge is socialism, right? And the obstacles that are in front of us are the same as they have always been. They will try to divide us. They'll try to divide us, but we unite in solidarity by embracing our many colors and histories, struggling shoulder to shoulder. We don't dismiss or gloss over or pretend that the working class doesn't have a variety of histories and a variety of colors, but we embrace those and we learn to understand one another and use that to build solidarity, not become class reductionists, but to understand that we all share various histories, immigrant communities, African descendants of slaves, very much our daily lives, our histories are a product of colonialism, this latest development of capitalism, right? And that means something on a day-to-day basis and in our material lives, right? And so they're going to try to divide us further by buying us off, right? To have us surrender with compromises that contain no truth or justice, to use grant money to keep us in a corner within the nonprofit industrial complex, to promise individuals with positions of power, to offer sections of our class a pathway to the middle class or the petty bourgeois who are forced to oppress us in order to maintain their position by necessity. But we stay strong as long as we are organized, as long as that we work, we learn, and we make decisions collectively and democratically, right? So I just wanted to underpin that this is a historical moment. Things really, truly are crumbling around us more every day today, that we live through years that feel like decades. But for the first time in multiple lifetimes, people are seeing that the problem is capitalism and see the solution as socialism, right? And so among the tools we have towards this vision is the community, a truly powerful unit of working class power that has the ability to shake the system and defend our peoples. So in our increasingly atomized, individualized, commodified society, learning to be active socialist neighbors in solidarity with our community is a revolutionary act, right? And so if our mission is to join in solidarity with anyone, anywhere who is oppressed, where they are oppressed, we have to fight to win together, to learn and grow together, and to never hold our tongue when speaking the truth of the matter about who is the enemy, capitalism, and what victory really looks like in the long term, which is democratic socialism. That's all I have my remarks there.
Thank you, Diego. So we're going to spend about the next 12 minutes or so with some quick Q&A. I am going to kind of merge the two questions that I saw in the chat that were both directed at Frank. And I'm going to throw in some of my own personal curiosity, actually, for the first question. Frank, you spoke multiple times to organizing that was done by the Communist Party, and I referenced it in my intro as well. So there's a question in here about the political education of communism and socialism and the role that it plays in movement building. But I know that I'm personally curious as to what parallels or maybe major differences do you see in the organizing that you were a part of with Communist Party organizers and what you see happening today. So that could be any movement space, I feel, whether it's CARPER or DSA. I'm a huge history dork. And I think, yeah, I'm just curious, what parallels, what differences do you see from what you saw in your organizing, especially with the Communist Party organizers, and today? Oops, I think you might be on mute, Frank.
I'm sorry, I always mess up on that. But I start off by saying I'm not that old. In terms of my living experience, I saw a lot happen. You know, I saw the party. I saw the party move away from what I thought was our main strategic source of strength, and that is the centrality of the struggle for Black liberation. The Communist Party was at its greatest when it held on to that position. After World War II, we started to diminish because you know, a lot of things happened. There was some out and out betrayals, you know, during the McCarthy era and so forth and so on. And then we kind of came back to that again in the 1960s, but we had lost so much strength, you know, as a result of McCarthyism, as a result of people trying to liquidate the party, that we weren't able to really come back in full force. And so today, I see a rejuvenation taking place. I see particularly with young Black people, you know, who actually are anti-capitalist, you know, and not just in rhetoric, but they're also trying to, you know, learn about what socialism is. So I think we have an opportunity here. And by the way, I am a part of a political organization called the Freedom Road Socialist Organization. And I think we have an opportunity here to bring back what I consider the revolutionary essence of Marxism. And that is that labor in a white skin cannot be free if it's branded and sold in a Black skin. You know, so long as and that's talking about the capitalist investment in racism. And that's talking about how the working class is deceived into thinking that it can free itself, you know, by ignoring the national question, by ignoring the question of Black oppression, or any other kind of national oppression going on in this country. But that can't happen. I don't believe that. I think the road to socialism means that we combine the revolutionary aspects of the Black liberation movement to the revolutionary aspects of socialism, bring them together. And I think that's I don't think that can be defeated. I think that's the winning hand. And I think we made a big mistake when we got away from that. And we have to go back and examine. But you know, and I even wrote a book about this called Marxist Leninist Perspectives on Black Liberation and Socialism. But now that's not just theoretical, you know. That's what we have to do. For example, the way that we fight for community control of the police. If we're just fighting for reform, we're not fighting for shit. You know, they don't need to be reformed, they need to be replaced. And so somebody mentioned Rosa Luxemburg earlier. But one thing that she said that I really latched on to in my younger years, going back 30 or 40 years, is that, you know, reform and revolution. She talked about that. So how do you define meaningful reform? How do you keep reform in the revolutionary process? And that is, it has to be about changing the power relationships between the oppressor and the oppressed. If you're not doing that, then you're just, moving cheers around on the Titanic. There has to be a change in the power relationship between the oppressor and the oppressed to take us that step forward, getting closer, or let me just put it like this here, to drive the revolutionary process forward. There has to be this constant struggle to change the power relationship. That's what workers do when they fight the capitalist bosses, through organized labor and whatever. That's what class struggle unionism does. It's about changing power relationship. That's what we're trying to do now with the police. If we don't change the power relationship between them and us, they will keep on killing us like they're killing us. And so changing the power relationship, that means getting involved in the political struggle. That means parliamentary struggle even, I'm not against it if it's about changing power relationships, we have to get into all of that. So I hope I didn't go too far away from the question, but the thing that I'm saying here is that we have to carry on the day-to-day struggles, whether we're talking about police crimes, whether we're talking about rent control, whatever we're talking about. We have to carry on those day-to-day struggles because the workers will not understand what the hell we're doing if we're not addressing their immediate needs, But at the same time, we have to have the long view that these struggles are going to recycle themselves over and over again. And we're just leading people in their frustration instead of leading them out of it if we're not talking to them about socialism. You got to talk about socialism. You got to let people know that there is a solution. Like Fred Hampton said, the solution to capitalism is socialism. The solution to racism is solidarity. They go together. We have to fight it like that. But we keep the long view there. In our day-to-day struggles. I got literature in our office right here, right now. Where if people come in and ask me about a book on socialism, I got one for them. Although we're fighting against racist and political repression, but this is how it has to be done. What was the other question? And I'm not going to go as long with the other question.
I think you got at it. I
got it. Okay.
Yeah. So I'm going to throw out just one more question, and it's to whoever unmutes first, honestly, because I don't even know who to direct it to, and you have 3 minutes to answer it. And that question is, DSA talks a lot, and I mean, movements in general talk a lot about building a multiracial working class, movement specifically. So I feel like we talk a lot about where we're trying to go, what we're trying to build. So I'm curious to hear, again, very quickly, where you feel we've already built it, whether it's on a micro level, local level, maybe it's on a national level. Are there examples where we've already actually done it? Whoever unmutes first.
Yeah, I can try to attend very quickly. And I think that we have done, I think, a lot of work with grassroots organizing. I'll say that I think a lot of the grassroots organizing that's happened on the South Side has been already in terms of socialist Black and Brown coalitions. I mean, we have been a coalition with Pilsen Alliance and the groups with Coco and many others who founded the Leave the Ban or Rent Control. There is a history of Black and Brown solidarity. And I think that we have now, of course, want to build a clear socialist platform. And I do think that is on the ground. There is a model already of what needs to happen in terms of building coalitions of color that, of course, Fred Hampton, and again, there's a lot of you see a lot of lips talking about that and deny that socialism has a big foot in the Black community. Of course it does. Fred Hampton was our model. He was our leader. And of course, we have people like Reed Lozano and a history of building organizing. I do think that we need right now, of course, we have 5 socialists. I think that we need to double that at least in the next election. And we got to start holding these puppets of the status quo, these oligarchs that including they're ones running the city. Their one is the one who run the city. They're ones who tell Lightfoot what to do. And, a big majority, unfortunately, right now of council members. So I think that we are building those coalitions. I think DSA is a young group, is doing a lot of great things. And I do think that we need to continue these conversations with the base. I'm glad to see Frank Chapman here and many great leaders who have been in solidarity and building with us for quite some time. And I think that we need to connect and have those conversations. And this is really refreshing. And I think that we do have a model here and we need to continue that way.
Thank you so much, Byron. I just want us to be forward thinking. We're always trying to build some new shit and we're trying to build some big shit. So I just want to make sure that we understand we have wins already. We've already done a lot of those things that we are still working towards on a smaller scale, on a local scale. So just want to give us a little pat on the back. Thank you so much to our panelists. We're going to move into the last part of today's discussion, which is, again, small breakouts, but a little bit longer. Everybody, oh my goodness, we went hard in that discussion. Thank you, Alan, for facilitating our group. So we're at the end, we're at wrap up. Sveta, do we have time for report backs or should we just move into?
I think since it's like we're 8 o'clock on a Friday night, we can just move into our next steps and wrap up. And then hopefully this is a sign that we have a lot more to say to each other about this and we can continue these conversations. Cool. Yeah, it's Friday night. We're almost there. We actually really appreciate everybody who stuck around through the whole event for this. I just want to remind everybody, if you somehow haven't heard yet, this discussion is part of our Towards the Socialist Chicago process, which is the first time we're trying to do something like this in Chicago DSA, which is to kind of collectively define our perspective and priorities through a period of discussion. And I just want to highlight a couple of important dates. May 30th coming right up is our deadline to submit proposals. We have a drafting committee that is going to do some magic to synthesize those into a document that we can debate, which will be released in early June. There'll be an opportunity to debate it. We'll have another one of these forums specifically just to review the document and figure out what's in there and see where we're at. We'll have an opportunity to amend that document, and then at our chapter convention on June 26th, we can say, great, this looks amazing. This is our roadmap for the next couple of years, and vote it up. We can amend it. We can say, hey, we need more time to talk, and vote it down. But I just want to encourage all of you to participate in that process, whether it's by submitting something or just keeping an eye out on the discussions and sharing your perspective and bringing that kind of big picture into all of us, all of our other organizing spaces. I'm going to put just one last time in the chat the toolkit for anything you want to know about Towards Social Chicago. And I'm also, if you didn't sign in, please do. I'm going to put that sign in link in the chat one more time. And other than that, I think we're going to call it good. Thank you all so much for being here. Thanks so much to our panel. You are all incredible. And thank you, Vico, for doing such a great job moderating the discussion.
Yeah, thank you, Sveta, and everybody else for joining us. We had over 50 people on a Friday evening. It was dope. We'll continue these discussions for a while. Thanks, y'all.